We are the San Diego Hub of Vesta, and it is such a pleasure to have you here today. It's a little bit weird to be saying, hey, we're happy you're joining us and talking about divorce, but we are really thrilled to be able to be of service to you in this way with the information that we're going to share with you today about how to talk to your kids about your divorce process. So, without further ado, I'm going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. I'm Elisa Kisselberg. I'm an attorney licensed in California, certified legal specialist, and I am a mediator full-time. And today I'm going to be providing you some of the legal information that you might need to know in this process, as well as talking to you about how mediation might fit into a model that could be supportive of you. And then we'll close up after we're finished with our intros and let you hear from Mandy, who is our Vesta concierge. So, all right, who of my fabulous hub is going to introduce themselves quickly next?
I'll go. I'm Lisa Frankovich. I'm the financial planner of the group, and I'm happy to be here today. I also want to hear what Kelly has to say. I'm really excited.
We are in for a treat.
I'm Jacob Bulber. Lisa and I are partners, and we offer all the financial services side of it. So we'll get into a little specific stuff later in, but I think you'll hear some repetitive themes throughout. Obviously, for this particular presentation, you want to make sure that yourself, your children, things like that are put in the best position that you possibly can be. Most of the folks on here will engage with you, and we're a great resource to do that. Lisa and I are licensed throughout every state in the US. There's no cost to talk with Lisa and I and get you going on stuff like that. So I look forward to it. And we'll speak a little further about the financial services side of it as we go on.
All right. Thank you, Jacob.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm the mortgage lender in the group. And although I don't have a direct tie-in on this topic so much, in other situations, in other webinars, I talk about buying out your spouse, how you finance it. Does it fit your budget, which is part of what you're talking to your kids about today too, is the budgeting. And if you have to sell, what does it look like for your kids and you and buying another house versus renting? So I'll talk about that a little bit today. Thank you for coming.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mandy Pullenbar, and I am one of Vesta's concierges. I've been with the organization for 6.5 years. It's really a privilege and an honor to be able to have these intimate conversations with our community where we take a deep dive into your specific situation and we begin to build a roadmap for you forward, whether that be working with all these amazing professionals that you're going to hear from today or a handful based on your situation. We check in with you periodically through your journey to make sure that you are being supported and receiving the right guidance. Almost everybody has our cell phones, so you can text us. We really try to make ourselves available because we went through it, not in your shoes, but on the same path. And I look forward to connecting with everyone. I'm going to put my information in the chat, and we will be following up with you tomorrow to hear about your experience today. Get a piece of paper and a pencil. You're going to hear a lot of great information. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And finally, we're going to let Kelly introduce herself, and we're going to start off with her. It is such a treat to have Kelly and her expertise with us. Obviously, she's a regular part of our hub. We've been together. It feels like we've been together as a little hub for quite a number of years. We're in for a lot of really great information. So you're going to be hearing from the rest of us as our time goes by. But without further ado, Kelly, turning it over to you, and you can introduce yourself.
Thank you. So, hi, everyone. I am Kelly Myers, and I am with First Steps Divorce. I am a divorce coach and co-parenting specialist. And the best way I think to describe what I do is the way a client referred to me. And they referred to me as the general contractor of divorce, because I really help you understand all the moving pieces of the process, help you get centered on the realities of divorce, because there's a lot of myths out there, and help you make more strategic decisions rather than decisions that are emotionally driven ones, so that hopefully you don't have any regrets after the divorce is finished. So that's generally what I do. The topic today is talking to your children about divorce. And when I'm working with divorcing parents, one of the questions I most often hear is, how do I tell my children that we're getting divorced? And honestly, I understand why that question comes up so much. For many parents, myself included, this is the conversation that they fear most because they're worried about hurting their children. They're worried about saying the wrong thing. They're worried about the questions that their children may ask, and sometimes even worried about what this divorce is going to mean for their relationship with their children moving forward. And As a divorced parent myself, and as someone who has worked with hundreds of families going through divorce, I want to start by saying this. There is no perfect way to have this conversation. There is no script that will remove all of your children's sadness, their confusion, disappointment, or even fear. And that's really important to understand because many parents, myself included, put a lot of pressure on themselves to get this conversation exactly right. And the goal isn't perfection. The goal is helping your child feel safe, loved, and supported as their family begins to change. And I want to emphasize those words begins to change because one of the biggest misconceptions parents have is that this is a one-time event in their children's lives, and it isn't. Today, we're going to be talking about how to start the conversation, but what your children will need most is not one perfect discussion with them. They're going to need parents who are willing to continue the conversation as questions come up, as feelings evolve, and as new experiences change their perspective or reignite their feelings around divorce. And one of the things that I often remind parents is that children are not harmed simply because their parents divorce. What tends to have the greatest impact on children is ongoing conflict, uncertainty, being placed in the middle of their parents' conflict or their parents' issues, or sometimes even feeling responsibility for what's happening. So, as I talk with you today, I want you to remember that this conversation is really the beginning of a larger message for children. And that message is, we love you. We are going to take care of you. And while some things are changing, you are not losing your family. Because although the marriage ends, the family for your children continues. So when it comes time to talk with your children, I encourage parents, whenever possible, to have this conversation together and present a united parenting message. And I know that this isn't always possible. Some parents are in high conflict situations, some aren't communicating well, and some aren't speaking to each other at all. But when parents are able to sit down together and share this message, share this conversation, it provides children with something that's incredibly important. It shows them that while the marriage may be ending, again, the parenting relationship and the family will be continuing. And children need to see that both of their parents are still showing up for them. Another recommendation I have for parents is to spend some time preparing for the conversation before you sit down and have it with your children. This is not a conversation to wing. And I will, in full disclosure, admit that I winged this conversation and I have regret around that today. So I suggest writing a script. And when I say write a script, I don't mean that you need to memorize every word or read from a piece of paper. What I mean is that this is one of the most important conversations you will have as parents, and it deserves some thought and preparation. And I encourage you to think about it this way. If you were going to be giving a really important presentation at work, you probably wouldn't walk into the room and just hope for the best. You'd probably spend some time really thinking about what you wanted to say, what some of the key messages you wanted people to hear and walk away with, and how you wanted to communicate those messages. And the same is true with this conversation. Taking the time to prepare can help you present a more unified message, reduce the chances of becoming emotional or defensive in the moment because maybe you're saying different things, and ensure that the most important information you want to convey to your children doesn't get lost. And I do want to note here that for children, they often don't remember the exact words that you've said. More what they remember is how they felt during this conversation. And so preparation helps you create that environment where they feel safe, supported, and cared for. So as much as possible, I encourage you to work together to identify some key points you want your children to hear. Talk through who's going to say what. Talk about how you're going to answer some possibly likely questions that are going to come up. How are you going to respond if your children become angry, upset, or emotional? The goal here isn't to create a script that feels rehearsed and that the conversation is only focused on what you said you wanted to say. The goal is to help your children experience the conversation as thoughtfully planned and centered on their needs rather than any conflict or disagreements that their parents may have. In reality, this conversation that you're going to have is probably going to be the first major co-parenting decision that you make together. And how you handle it is really going to set the tone for your children in terms of how they're going to experience the transitions moving forward. Because where parents take that time to prepare together, they send a powerful message to their kids. And that is, we may no longer be a married couple, but we are still your parents, and we are working together to support you through this. So before you talk with your children, I encourage you to agree on a few key messages that you're going to convey. Because no matter what happened in the marriage, here are some things that your children need to hear. First, this is an adult decision. This is not your fault. We both love you. We will always be your parents, and we're going to take care of you. And it's also important when you're thinking about this conversation around timing. Avoid having this conversation right before school, right before bedtime, before a major holiday, or an event that's important for your children. If they've got a big soccer game or tournament on Saturday, having this conversation Sunday or Friday night or Saturday morning is probably not the best time to do this, because your children are going to need time and space to process what they've heard, right? And remember that in this conversation, you don't have to cover everything. And in fact, I would encourage you not to. We don't want to overload our children with information. Think of this conversation as just opening the door to discussion, not delivering every answer. So as you're opening the door, again, the first thing that your children need to hear is this is not your fault. The reality is that children are very egocentric, and they often see themselves at the center of events around them. Many children, believe it or not, secretly wonder, did I cause this? And if I behaved better, would mom and dad stay together? And even if they're not saying these words out loud, they may still wonder them. So we want to tell them directly, this is a decision between mom and dad. Nothing you did caused this. And second, you want to tell them we both love you. And not just mom loves you, dad loves you. We both love you. Children need that reassurance that they don't need to choose between their parents, right? Which again leads to the next message, which is you don't need to take sides. One of the most difficult positions a child can be placed in is feeling responsible for protecting one parent from the other, or having to choose which parent is right, or who loves them more, or who loves them less. Children should never feel that they have to choose who they love or to take sides. They should just have permission to have a healthy relationship with both parents. And finally, you want to let them know that we are going to take care of you. And I'm going to repeat this again. Children do not need all the answers. They don't need every detail. What they need is confidence that the adults are handling the adult problems. I'm going to say that again. Confidence that the adults are handling the adult problems. Because one of the best gifts that we can give children during divorce is allowing them to remain children and not bringing them into our adult world. And it's important to remember that children process divorce differently depending upon their developmental stage. For younger children, the focus is usually very practical for them. They want to know, where will I sleep? Who's going to take me to school? Who's going to tuck me in at night? Where will my toys be? And as adults, we sometimes think of these questions as small because we're dealing with so many bigger issues. But for children, they're enormous because those questions represent safety and predictability in their life. For older children and teens, they often want more information. And this is where you might get that question of why. Or they may want to know who wanted the divorce. They may ask them really difficult questions. And while it's important to answer them as honestly as possible, it's equally important not to burden them with adult information. Your child does not need to know the details about infidelity, finances, or your marital conflict. So when you're thinking about what to tell your children, here are two questions I'd like you to ask yourself. Do I want to tell my children this because they need to know this information or because I have a need to tell it? And will this information make things easier for them or harder? The other thing to be thinking about is, would I be sharing this type of information with my kids while we were married? My guess is most of you protected them from adult information, from things that were going on in your marriage. And just because you're going through divorce, that shouldn't be any different. Again, we want to give children enough information so that they can understand what's happening and understand that there's going to be a change in the family without feeling any responsibility for having to carry the adult problems or having to decide which parent do they align with if one parent wronged the other parent or one parent's mad at the other parent. I often will hear parents, for instance, when the question becomes who decided they wanted the divorce. And I've had clients say, I'm not going to say I wanted the divorce. It wasn't my choice to destroy our family. And my question to them is, do you think that information is going to help your children or make this whole process more difficult for them? Do they really need to know who chose this? Or do they really just need to be supported? And I think that this becomes, like I said, even more important as children become older. And with teenagers in particular, we may think that they are mature enough to have this information than maybe a younger child. But they still need you as parents. They don't need to be your confidants. And the same goes with adult children, because adult children struggle with divorce. And we often forget adult children in this whole equation of divorce. And while they may have a greater understanding of what's happening, they can still experience loss and grief and uncertainty over how the family's changing and what's going to happen. And so, again, one of the most important things parents can give their adult children is that permission to love and maintain relationships with both parents without being caught in the middle or feeling as though they need to align or protect one parent. Because whether your child is 5, 15, or 35, it's important to remember that they are going to be impacted by this. And there is no right way to react to the news that your parents are getting divorced. And that's something that we often miss as parents, this reaction, how kids feel. We tend to be so focused on what we're going to say, right? But it's equally important to be focused on what happens after you tell them, after you've had this conversation. And one thing that I tell parents is don't judge how your child is doing solely based on their initial reaction. Some children may cry, some get angry, some ask 100 questions, some may say nothing at all, and some may feel completely unaffected. In my situation, I had 3 different children, and they all reacted very differently. So there is no kind of one way of reacting to this news. And the fact of the matter is that these kids are processing this news, and they're processing it in unique ways to them. Think very much around how you process the decision to get divorced, or if you were told that your spouse wanted a divorce, you needed to process that. And your children need to have that same time and space to do that. And for many children, this processing can continue to go over a number of weeks, months, or even years. And what's important as parents is to really be thinking about how we're going to respond to these emotions. I'll tell you that from my own experience and what I've seen with working with lots of parents is it's a normal reaction when kids are upset to try to make the pain go away and make it better. We might say, don't worry about it. It's actually going to be really great. You're going to have two great homes. You're going to have two sets of everything, two Christmases, two birthdays, whatever it may be. Or you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. But what does that do to kids, right? It doesn't validate their feelings. And so what is more helpful is to really lean into what they're feeling. Validate that. You could say something like, I can see this feels really scary for you. Or simply, I understand why you're upset. That makes sense. Change can be really hard. And the reality is that even when you're validating these feelings with your kids, it doesn't make the emotion, those feelings go away, but it tells them that you're willing to sit with them in those feelings. And that's often what children need most. And when you can sit there in those feelings, very often it opens more doors to conversations. Which leads me to this idea that, again, it's this conversation is not just a one and done, right? This is the divorce conversation itself is a single event, right? And you're telling your children about what's going to happen. You may be answering some questions, and then you hope they're going to move forward. But the reality of it is that divorce is not a single event in children's lives. And therefore, the conversation shouldn't be a single occurrence. It should be an ongoing discussion with kids, an ongoing discussion to help them process this change to the structure in their family. Because, as I mentioned before, children will often revisit their thoughts and feelings around the change at different stages in their life, right? A 5-year-old, again, may be focused more on where they're going to sleep and who's going to tuck them in at night. A 10-year-old may begin to wonder why the divorce happened, who started it, right? Was their fault? A teenager may start thinking about their own relationships, issues with trust, what divorce may mean for their own future. And then you've got your adult children who may look back and make sense of experiences that occurred in their childhood and start looking at it in a very different way. Or they may worry about how are their parents now going to interact at their college graduation, their wedding, or the birth maybe of a grandchild. So this issue of divorce is not a single event. It's not a single conversation. It needs to be something that you keep that dialogue open and check in with your kids from time to time, right? And you don't need to make this check-in formal. It can be something really simple about how you feeling about everything lately. Is there anything you've been wondering about? How are things going between the homes? I want to make a key point there. When you're asking how things are going between homes, that can be a dicey question for your kids if there's a lot of conflict between you and your co-parent. They may feel like you're trying to check in. What's mom doing? What's dad doing? So you have to be careful with that question and really make it about how are you doing? How are you managing this? What's difficult for you? How can we make it easier versus what's going on over there? So it's a very different question than trying to suss out information. It's really more about how your child is handling this living in two homes. Because the reality of it is, I think it would be difficult for all of us as adults to have to travel between two homes on a regular basis, every 2 days, every 3 days, every week, whatever it may be. And so it's important that we put ourselves in our children's shoes and be thinking about what they may be experiencing during this family change. And I'll tell you, my experience was even when you ask these questions, sometimes your children aren't going to have a whole lot to say. I think that is particularly true with teenagers. But again, sometimes they're going to surprise you. And the most important thing about this process and this idea of it's not a one and done conversation and keeping the dialogue open is that you want to let your kids know that the door is always open for talking, because it's the greatest gift you can give your children is that permission to talk about their feelings and to let them know that what they're feeling is not off limit, and that in doing and talking about these things, they are not going to upset mom or dad when they bring it up. When children know that they can return to the conversation months or even years later, they learn something really important. They learn that their feelings matter and that their questions are welcome and that they don't have to carry all those thoughts inside of them by themselves. So I know that this process probably feels like a lot. You're taking a lot in. And what I'd want to leave you with, and the centering thing that I'd like you to focus on, is to think about, if only one thing, is to be thinking about years from now, what story do you want your children to tell about this moment, right? This conversation that you had, or this time in their life while their parents were going through divorce and then they had to live in a two-home environment. Do you want them to be reflecting on the conflict between their parents, or how in this conversation where divorce was introduced to them, it was more about each of them trying to say what they needed to tell, right? Or do you want them to remember that my parents handled a difficult situation with love? My parents put us first. Or even though our family changed, I always knew I was loved. Because the reality is, divorce changes the structure of family, but it does not have to define a child's future. The conversation you have with your children is important, but what may be even more important is, again, what happens after that conversation. The way you show up for them, right? You could blow that conversation, but if you circle back and you show up for them and you maybe try to create some clarity and maybe some things that you didn't say perfectly right, or maybe where things were confusing, what they're going to remember is the way you showed up for them. They're going to remember how you talked about their other parent. Because remember, from the time kids are little, usually we're talking about the fact that, oh, you're like your dad, you walk like your dad, or you talk like your dad, or you laugh like your mom, or you have your dad's sense of humor, or whatever it may be, or the same likes or dislikes of one parent. Or what happens to those kids when suddenly that parent that they are half like, now their other parent is saying disparaging things about them? That has an impact on kids. So your kids are going to remember how you talked about the other parent, the way that you made room for their feelings, the way that you reassured them, supported them, and continued to remind them that they are loved by both of their parents, that they never had to choose between either one of you. So remember that this conversation isn't about finding the perfect words for the moment. It's about creating an environment where your children know they can keep coming back to you to have this conversation as they grow, as they have more questions, as their understanding of the situation evolves. And you don't have to have all of the answers. You don't have to get everything right. You simply just need to be a steady, supportive presence in your children's lives to help them navigate this change. And not just for today, but for the months and the years ahead. Now, I want to touch on something because I hear very often when we talk about children and divorce, people will often say that children are resilient. They're going to be fine. Children are resilient. And while that can be true, resilience doesn't develop in a vacuum. Children learn resilience by watching adults around them navigate difficult situations. They build resilience when they feel safe enough to ask hard questions, express difficult emotions, and trust that the people who love them will continue to show up for them. And every time you listen, validate, reassure, and keep the conversation open, you're helping your child develop the skills and confidence to navigate life's challenges, because there will be more challenges in their life. divorce and the change to their family is not the only challenge that they're going to experience. And they are going to be looking to you as their first teacher to model how to handle this difficult situation and this change in their lives. Before I close, I do want to acknowledge that this whole conversation can just feel really hard to contemplate. And as a coach, I see people put this conversation off for a very long time. Often I will be talking to people and they may have been not sleeping in the same bedroom for months, not sharing family dinners together, not doing the things as parents the way they used to. And yet there has been no conversation with the children. And a lot of times people say, we don't have this conversation until we have all the answers. We don't even know what we're doing. We don't know where we're living. We don't know what we're doing. And I would just like to tell you that, again, you don't have to have all the answers. And the reality of it is, even though your children may be little or they're not hearing you fight or argue or whatever it may be, your children they're seeing things. I think the number is that there's 60% of communication is nonverbal. So they're seeing nonverbal communication that goes on between you and their other parent, and they're sensing something's wrong. And I can assure you that as they're sensing this, the story that they're telling themselves about what may be going wrong could possibly be worse than the reality of it. They may, again, because they are egocentric, be thinking, this is about me. I did something. And they're waiting for the other shoe to fall. And so you have a choice. You can allow them to sit in anxiety or lessen that anxiety for them. And again, you don't have to have all the answers. You can merely say, let them know that this is what you and their other parent have decided, that you're gonna get divorced and you're working things out. You don't have all the answers. But what you do know is that you will always love them, that you will always be there to support them and take care of them. And you can also address some of the concerns they may have. Things around, am I going to be able to still go to my school? Am I still going to be able to play baseball or go to dance? Am I going to be able to live here in my neighborhood? And if you think about those things and you're planning this conversation ahead of time, you can get ahead of a lot of those questions and be able to calm some of their fears by letting them know, what we know right now is that you're going to continue to go to your school. You're going to continue to be able to play basketball or go to dance or take piano lessons. And right now we're going to stay here and you're going to stay close to your friends. That may change down the road, but we will let you know when that happens. What we want you to know is that what is most important to us is you. And we're going to do everything we can to make decisions to continue to allow you to do the things that are important to you. And that's it. You don't have to have all the answers. And so what I'll also acknowledge is that while you're listening to everything that I'm saying, I'm sure many of you are going, I understand everything you're saying is important, but I still don't know what to say and how to say it, and I'm nervous about doing that. And so the good news is there are wonderful resources available to help you prepare for this conversation. As a coach, one of the ways that I help clients is by working with them before they have the conversation. Together, we think about what are the messages they think that their children are going to need to hear. How do we prepare the script and the discussion and anticipate some of the difficult questions that their children may ask? Because you all know your children better than anybody else, and you know what might be on their minds or what they might be scared about or they might be angry or have big emotions. And if we can talk about that ahead of time, we can really talk about how you're going to respond to your children and how are you going to show up in that moment as more of a united front. Because at the end of the day, you may not be partners in a marriage, but you will always be partners in co-parenting. And that is never going to change. Even when your kids turn 18, my kids are in their 20s, I'm still co-parenting. Your kids, like I said, they're going to get married, they're going to have grandkids, all of that. And you're still going to be their parents and their children's grandparents. And that's never going to change. And how you decide you're going to you're going to craft this co-parenting relationship is going to have an impact on your children and their children. Divorce leaves a legacy. You get to decide right now what that legacy is going to be. And all the decisions you make, from how you're going to have this conversation, whether you can do it together or not, how you're going to share this information, how you're going to operate together as co-parents, is going to dictate what that looks like for your kids. The other resource that I want to give you is a book called Parenting Apart by Christina McGee. Christina has spent decades helping families navigate divorce and co-parenting, and her book offers a lot of really great suggestions. And the beauty of the book is you can just go to the table of contents, look at a topic that is relevant to maybe what you're going through, and just read that chapter. You do not need to read it cover to cover. So I highly recommend that. I would also encourage you to listen to the Divorce and Beyond podcast. Susan Guthrie, who is the host of that podcast, has most of the industry's experts on her podcast, and she has got many podcasts dedicated to helping your children through this process, navigating co-parenting. And the beauty about it is, if you go to her Divorce and Beyond website, she's got a little widget on her site, and you can say that you are interested in topics related to co-parenting or your children, and it will populate all of those podcasts that are related to that topic, so you don't have to go and look through all 300 or 400 of all the podcasts she has. So just realize you don't have to figure this out on your own. There's a lot of support out there, and I encourage you to take advantage of that support. And with that, Elisa, I think you've got some great stuff to share as well.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm going to tell you that what she said, the shortest presentation that I've ever gotten to give on this one, because you covered all of the things. So thank you, really. The information that you all, seriously, Kelly, thank you.
Thanks.
I can say that out of all of my experience as a former family law trial attorney, the most difficult cases have been the ones where the parents don't get this right. And so you're in a really special position as you're sitting here. And I know from some of the questions that are coming into the chat that we're going to be answering that it hasn't turned out all pretty and pink with a bow on top. And so I want to also give you some of the candid information that you need to know about how this can go if it doesn't go as well as you hoped, but also to let you know that you can start where you are, right? So if you're still living together, you haven't figured out what you're going to do, where you're going to live, how you're going to get there, that you can begin to talk about these things now. I work as a mediator, full service capacity, in that you can still be living together. And it may be that you come into mediation and we figure out what to do and line you up with a resource like Kelly so that you can get some coaching on how to say it and what to say and when to say it and all of those kinds of things. But the important thing to know is that there is, from the legal perspective, the way the court looks at it, is that the children need to have frequent and continuing contact with both parents. And whenever there has been a break in that parental relationship, it is considered harmful to the children, right? So it is you and your spouse that are uncoupling. It's not the children that are unparenting. So that is often one of the biggest challenges that couples face, especially if you're not on the same page. So one person decides to tell the story, and then how do you respond to this narrative that somebody else has started? And that is a tricky one. The balance between talking to the children and telling them you're getting a divorce versus talking about the divorce, letting them see the pleadings, telling them what the other person said, and those kinds of things. So it is important to know that if you were in a traditional process, meaning someone files a request for order for custody and co-parenting orders, that the court would make orders to not make disparaging remarks about the other parent to the children. The court can also make orders that you shall not allow others to make disparaging remarks about the children where the children can hear it. So those will be the kinds of things that the court can make long-term orders about. Now, again, how do you enforce it? But what happens is each level of these things, when those things aren't in place, it amps up and it amps up and it amps up. And those are the most expensive. They're the most time-consuming. Like, I see cases that sometimes people are getting divorced longer than they were married. So their children are now out of high school, and that precious little window of time that you have to be with your children is used up in this way. So we're not gonna spend any more time talking about the horror stories because you could just hop on any social media, whatever, to see it. The important thing is to know that it doesn't need to be that way, that there are some tools that are available to you. No one has to be wrong for you to be right, and that you can actually begin to work together and figure out some of these things. So do know that it is important that once you have these conversations with your children, if you can be on the same page, it is the gold standard, right? Having a conversation with each other before you're telling the children so that you're on the same page, you're communicating the same things and those type of things. The challenge often is after one person has told a story, like how do you even respond to that? And Kelly already touched on some of those things. And I know there's some questions that have come in the chat. Here in a moment, we're going to answer them live because they're so good. But that's the thing. Like, how do you respond to somebody giving your children wrong information? So Kelly, this is like the thing. They started it and they threw a rock and now
Totally
it's
get it.
thrown out.
Totally get it. And I think that you don't need to address who's right and who's wrong. What you need to address is how your children are feeling. So it could be something like, gosh, that had to be really hard to hear. I feel for you. How can I help you? What can I do to help you through this? Because the reality of it is, like I said, divorce is not going to be the only hard thing they're going to experience in life. So always take these issues outside of the lens of divorce, which I know for some of you may be like, oh yeah, easier said than done. I was in a very high conflict co-parenting relationship, which is, it's a much nicer, it's actually a very nice relationship now, but I had to work at that. And it really was I had to take everything out of the lens of divorce and just be looking at how would I help my child if they heard something hard to hear somewhere else? How would I do that?
That's me intent.
Totally good. Yes. Now, one of the things that could come up is, hey, where am I going to live? I want to live with one parent versus the other and the choosing between the parents. And again, it is super important that your children not feel like they're in the middle, but rather that they are at the center of what you are focusing on, okay? Famous words. Again, Christina McGee is one of my favorite teachers, and I'm so lucky that I've gotten to do multiple trainings with her. But that has always landed for me. And when I talk to my clients who are in mediation, and many of them they've got lawyers already and they need to figure out a different way, that's what we come back to. How do you put your kids in the center? Now, what about this choosing? A kid getting to choose. Now, Kelly mentioned that, hey, this is an adult decision, not a kid decision. So they don't get to necessarily decide, but in California, at least, the children do have the opportunity to state a preference. Now, how does that happen? Some people are like, do they just tell somebody? How does that work? The court can consider the preference of a child, but the court doesn't have to do what they want. I've had plenty of cases where I was the litigating attorney, and I've been on both sides for moms and dads, where the kids, nope, this is who I want to be with, and the court said nope. Or the kid said, I want to be here, and the judge said nope. The one parent says, or any combination of things. And it's never going to be a situation, just so you know, where there would be no contact, right? Even in the worst case scenario, it's probably going to be supervised visitation or supervised parenting time. Very rarely is it completely no contact unless there's some really serious allegations of abuse. So no, that's a thing. So a lot of times people are like, oh, it's just so bad. I just don't want them to even be with the other parent. But in reality, that's not necessarily in their best interest either. And again, it might be that your co-parent needs some training. It might need that they need some education. It might need they need some skills because they just don't know how to do all the things that you've always done, or they may not have a perspective. But in my experience in having mediated hundreds of cases, and many of them very high conflict, there's not ill intention often in the parent who seems to be not really showing up so well. Yes, there's anger and upset, but when it comes to the kids, that's where the focus gets to become. And when you focus on what's best for them, often it can take the co-parent dynamic somewhat out of it. And again, there are exceptions to the really high conflict and where there's mental health issues and those kinds of things that are a completely different category, or domestic violence or other kinds of really serious allegations of abuse and those kinds of things. That's completely another topic for another day. So that being said, I want to invite some of our other presenters to come in and talk. I could go on, but Kelly really did cover all of the most important things that I would want to say. I do want to let you know that that piece about hearing from the children, oftentimes that is done in a very careful way. Okay. and it should be handled very carefully. I'm always concerned when people are saying, oh, the judge is, you're just going to go talk to the judge. And so again, it puts a lot of pressure on kids. At least in Southern California, if you were in a traditional litigated process, you would file a request for order for custody. And again, I hate that word. Jail and family court, only place where we use that term. But you would be filing for custody. You would get a family court services date, and family court services, many people call it mediation. It is not true mediation. True mediation is a neutral where they don't have a horse in the race. In family court services, you're meeting with a mental health professional who is going to talk to both parents, perhaps talk to the children or hear from the children, and then they're going to make a recommendation to the judge about what the co-parenting plan should look like. And in a lot of times, there's a 90-ish, high 90-ish percentage, almost most of the time, the court will adopt that recommendation of the family court services professional that interviewed the two of you and perhaps talked to your children in maybe a 30-minute to 1 hour period of time max.
Wow.
If you're lucky. If you're lucky, right? And it might be over the phone, might not even be in person. They're not going to. So typically, if you're going to be going to family court services, you want to get some legal advice and talk to a professional about how to prepare. People don't even know how to prepare to be effective and efficient, not against their co-parent, but just to get the information out, right? So just know that's the default rule. So imagine that someone that doesn't know your children, doesn't know your family, doesn't know the details about what their needs are, they're going to be making a recommendation to the court that the judge, who knows nothing about your family, is going to adopt. So what will happen? You could ask for an evidentiary hearing once you get that report. It's a confidential report. It's not in the public court file. You can ask for an evidentiary hearing, and then the judge, again, in a really short window of time, is going to be hearing evidence in a very formal way. So it's not like you're going to get to show up and really talk about your kids and what's best for them. So that's the default rule. That's how it goes if you don't do it a different way. And again, many cases are negotiated agreements and things don't necessarily go to a final trial, but these, what we call interim orders, they're real and they're expensive and they are really hard. So again, I get to be the buzzkill and give you all of the default rules that are crummy, but it's important to just know that if you don't have these agreements, that's where that goes. So let's talk about and switch gears a minute and talk about some of the other things that come up once you're beginning to have these conversations about the divorce. What are we doing? Where are we going? How are we going to get there? And some of the tools that are going to be helpful to you as you're navigating this are things like what Zach does. So Zach, I'm going to turn it over to you. You could talk about the marital home, what that looks like.
Absolutely.
How
And
that works.
I'm going to be super fast. We still have to have Lisa and Jacob talk, and there's so many good questions that we're going to answer for you. So I think the best way for me to be brief is just to talk about my story last year because it pertains to the marital home. It pertains to adult children. My kids are high 20s, low 30s. And the house is the only house they knew, 38 years. They grew up there. And I'm sorry if I get teary-eyed about it because it's just the house is a house that I bought on my own when I was 24. It was really hard. But I think when I communicated to the kids that there was no choice but to sell the house, they were crushed because they had all their memories there and everything. And they were old enough, and again, this isn't going to apply to the younger kids, but they were old enough for me to sit down and go, hey, your mother and I did everything possible to keep the home. I need to make sure that they knew that it wasn't just a flippant decision off the cuff. I had dug through finances, the budgets, all the stuff that you guys should do, figure out, is there a possible way? Is it mathematically possible? And because everybody has so much equity like we did, how the heck can I come up with half the equity to give my spouse? How can you do that? Isn't even possible. Okay, so it's possible, but does it fit the budget? So I went through this with my kids, and I hope that they understood that ultimately the house just had to be sold. It just had to go on the market. And there was a process for them to come over and help me go through all of their stuff. So the good news is I was able to get rid of all of their trophies and all their, we all store our kids' stuff forever. We're the storage unit, right? And so the storage unit was out because there was no room in my new little rental for their stuff. I'm not to make light of it, but that happened as well, right? You got rid of all of your stuff and got that all cleaned out. So get them involved and explain to them that, hey, now that we're not together, there are two households that have to be covered with expenses. The income is exactly the same coming in. Now there's an extra household that has to be accounted for, right? Because we have two households. And to this day, it's been about a year. I don't know if they fully understood. And obviously I stumbled and fumbled. I'm not experienced at doing that. But that's my advice with the adult children. Just tell them that you've done everything possible in order to
And it
do
is
it.
different what you do with adult children versus children that are under 18, but it's
Yeah.
a wonderful example of getting to hear that, Zach, in terms.
Yeah. And I'm the math guy. I did the mortgage numbers. I did home equity line, buyout. How is it possible? And I told him, I said, hey, look at the equity here. There's just no possible way. There's just no possible way. And I think they understood as we move forward. So with that, I'll quickly turn it over to Lisa and Jacob, and then we get to the questions.
Thank you so much.
Hello. I think
Jacob.
yes, for dealing with kids, one of the most important things you can do before talking to them is creating your own budget for each of you. Now that there's going to be 2 households, what's that going to look like? What things will the kids maybe have to miss out on for a period of time? Or who's going to pay for what? And you just let them know what it's going to look like so that they're fully understanding that when it's happening. We often see people not talk to their kids about it, and then they're just canceling things, and their kids don't understand and they think it's their fault. So if you can have that communication with them prior and let them know why that has to happen, it's much better than just leaving them out of that conversation. Secondarily, another one we see a lot that can be a mistake is when you have beneficiaries, like when your divorce is finalized, you get to change your beneficiaries. If you have children under the age of 18, they cannot be your beneficiaries because that will end up taking the account, whatever account it is, to probate. So developing an estate plan for the kids or a trust or something so that they can still get assets under the age of 18 is very important. Also, if one of the spouses dies after everything's finalized, if you have children, as long as they're under the age of 18, you can collect Social Security on your spouse that pays for them. So you can get Social Security for the kids. It can help with your expenses. And the final thing I'm going to talk about is getting life insurance. Making sure that if someone does pass, that you have life insurance on each party that goes to the other in that to help them if that happens. Now we're going to go over to Jacob, who's going to talk about college planning and all the other fun stuff.
Thank you, guys. And thanks everyone who's joining us. And hopefully, again, as we always repeat, these are great resources up here. Hopefully, you guys are getting some really valuable information to help you guys out. So just a kind of a couple of housekeeping things is like I said in the beginning, most of us here we do this type of planning across the US. So we're available for you regardless of where you're at. And one of the things that I repeat every single time is we get the question of when should I engage with you guys? And I'll say the same answer I always do, and everyone knows here, right away. And the reason that we say that is whether you're a month from starting this process or if you're 2 years from starting the process, the way that's going to feel the most comfort about this is if comfort can even be a word we use, but at least help maybe relieve some of the stress and anxiety is to have the information, right? So like anything in life, if we do not have the information, we cannot take the right path or make the decisions that may benefit us and our children in this example here going forward. So engage with all of us, get the information, collect it. I promise you, it will set you on a path, at least just from a mental perspective, of possibly some ease. And then where Lisa and I come in specifically on the financial kind of services side of the things is, again, we get folks that sometimes we're working with both the spouse in the situation, sometimes we're working with one of the spouses. And one of the themes that comes up quite often when we do have younger children is, what am I going to have to stop for the children, right? Is it going to be their sports? Is it going to be cheerleading? Is it going to be soccer? What is it? Is it going to be their hobbies? And so what we found, again, just was starting right off in the beginning of you guys collecting this information, is sometimes what we initially think is not going to be the eventual outcome, right? And I think that's really important is that, yes, it's always a very tough task in the beginning. A lot of times it's 2 households having to be supported at the same time while we are going through this process. But again, whether you're someone who was a stay-at-home parent, someone who worked part-time, or you were the person who worked full-time, rest assured that the courts and the mediators who are involved, the idea is for it to be fair for everybody, and this includes the children. So whether it be the medical insurance for the kids or that cost of medical care or sports, that will all be addressed. So again, meeting with us, collecting that information, and then the part that Lisa and I are looking at, we are looking at the assets. We're looking at the 401ks and the pensions and Social Security and all that sort of stuff to, again, hopefully reinforce to you that maybe it is a shorter period of time that something does have to change for the kids. And so if I'm in that situation, and I have been, and I'm thinking, man, I'm going to have to really change something financially for my kids. But if I knew that that may only be 6 or 12 months, I can approach my children in a different way as well, too, right? And talk to them about there are going to be some changes, but it looks like it's probably going to be for a period of time. And then eventually we'll be able to do X, Y, Z. So having that information and harnessing that, I think is going to help you not only from a stress standpoint, but also with the kids. And as most of the folks talked about here, obviously trying to make sure that the theme with the kids is not related to money talk, right? As we talk about their children. And so the financial part of it, I think we'd all agree here. You want to try to limit that as much as possible. I will share a personal story as well, too, is that during my divorce, we had accrued some assets for our kids for our college funding. Now, one of the things we had done is we decided not to use the traditional 529 plans. We actually had chose a tax-free investment, which I won't get into today, but it's another option to utilize. The issue with that is it wasn't recognized by the courts as a funding for the children, right? Even if one of us said, yes, it is, no, it wasn't recognized that way. And so it ended up, unfortunately, actually just being dispersed to the two parents, right? So that's another little scenario right there, right? Is that's future thinking, even if our kids are young, but that is the type of stuff that we want to look at and address, right? Is there existing 529s for the kids, right? If there's not, is that something that's discussed during this process to ensure things like that are set up for the kids? And then lastly, I'll mention something, I think Lisa was touching on it, but also in addition, just know from Social Security as well, if you're married at least 10 years to your spouse and you do not remarry yourself, even if your ex-spouse gets married, you are still entitled to up to 50% of their Social Security at your retirement age. So again, little nuggets like that, but that stuff I think is very important. So you guys have the information. Hopefully it eases that process a little bit. So engage with us. As soon as you're thinking about this is possibly a step you're going to take, engage with all of us. We'll be there in the beginning. We'll be there during the process, and all of us will be there afterwards as well, too. So thank you, guys.
So helpful. Thank you, Jacob.
All right.
I do
I'm gonna
wanna
start.
we're gonna
Oh, go.
we're gonna go into some Q&A here in a minute because we have some really great questions in the chat that are so good that we're gonna keep your confidences but answer them live so that others get the benefit of the information. So I want to just comment on the overarch that you're hearing. Hey, learn about these things early before you have these conversations. So you might be feeling like, wait, which do I do first and where do I begin? So this is an important thing. The way that I work with couples, because I'm the neutral and I'm an attorney, I can give you both the legal information from a reliable source so that you're both hearing it at the same time. You can begin to talk about things. Often it's okay, we're gonna triage like you would if you came into an emergency room. What needs to be done? Perhaps you're starting with someone like Kelly to even be able to have the conversation with your spouse about how to tell your children or how you're going to tell it now that the story's been told, right? Or even I have had many conversations in mediation about how are we going to tell our children. We're not ready to tell our children until we talk to the finance people or until we find out what's happening with the house. And so that you can at least be on the same page about that. So just know wherever you are, it is okay. You can come as you are. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to have a bow on it. It can be messy. But the goal is to help you find the best tool for the task so that you can be as informed in your decision making and in the best position possible to support the outcomes for your family. So the two of you, even on your worst day, can actually make good decisions. You can get there. Even high conflict cases can reach agreements in mediation or in a negotiated agreement with the right people in the right place to guide you. Okay, so let's get into these questions. We had some really excellent ones that came in. I want to say thanks to everyone for staying. I see that everybody that started out with us, we have added a few more people even, but everybody's still here. So this is the juicy stuff. This is where you get to actually put it into practice. So just know the information we're giving is not legal advice. It's not intended to create any kind of professional or ongoing lolly, but it's meant for educational and informational purposes only. Did I do good on my little
Yes.
thingy? Okay.
Yeah.
So take it in the spirit that it's intended, as my Southern granny used to say.
Okay, so the first question that I'm going to type for you, Kelly, what was the name of the book you recommended again?
I put it in the chat. It's Parenting Apart by Christina McGee, and the podcast is Divorce and Beyond.
There's
Perfect.
another good book for adult kids called
Yes.
Will Never Be the Same.
Yes.
Will Never Be the Same Again by Hughes, and I can't remember the other. Anyway, really good. Carol Hughes, PhD, and another co-wrote it. A really good one for adult children. So if you are an adult child of divorce, great for you. And if your kids are in that category, like what Zach was talking about.
The next question was, is there a link to these resources? Does somebody up there want to answer? The link to that?
I don't have, I'll try to link it. I'll try to put the links in the chat.
Parenting Apart is available on Amazon.
Oh, no, it's not for the books, just in general for all of us. What is the
Well,
link?
and we did put in a link for
Yeah.
our Vesta Hub. So yes, there should be one in there in the very beginning of the chat that you can connect all the resources.
Okay, perfect. Yes, there is the link in the chat. The next question is for Jacob. If the spouse does not remarry and qualifies for 50% of other ex-spouse's Social Security, what happens if that spouse remarries?
Great question. We get that all the time. It does not matter. So the spouse could remarry multiple times, does not matter. You are still entitled as long as you did not remarry to up to 50%. The reason we say up to 50% because it does depend on your age as well too. You're eligible to get it once that ex-spouse, calling it, opens the window, so they've applied and they start taking Social Security.
Okay, but I think the question is what happens if the one who gets a 50% remarries? Then they'll get their new spouses. Right?
Correct. So if you don't have so it's one or two things would happen is either one, if you were currently collecting Social Security, so obviously you were eligible, you would either default to either your own Social Security, whatever that amount was, or again, up to 50% of your new spouse's Social Security. And usually Social Security will give you whatever the largest is.
All right. The next one is a good one, and this is for Kelly. If you have any advice on how to deal with situations where there have been substantial verbal abuse, which the children would have also witnessed, restraining order situations, and how to talk about the high conflict restrained person to the children.
It's a great question. And what I would tell you is that I think there's probably some specific guidance I could give you if I knew the details of it. And so please feel free to reach out to me. I do a free consultation and I'd put my link in the chat. But what I will give you is the key here is to lean into how your kids are feeling about the situation, right? So if the parent is saying nasty things about you, again, like I said earlier, lean into that had to be hard to hear, or that must be really confusing for you to hear your mom or your dad say that. Sometimes when people are in a disagreement about things, sometimes people get angry and they say things that are hurtful. But what I want you to know is that we both love you. So it really is not vilifying the other parent. It is trying to dig into how this child might be feeling about a situation. Sometimes you can relate to if you've got kids who maybe had a best friend or a really good friend and then they had a falling out, right? And they maybe weren't saying nice things about each other on the playground or wherever it may be. Remember when you had your falling out and you didn't have very nice things to say about each other while you were fighting, right? Sometimes that happens and that's really hard, right? And so you, again, are focusing on what your child might be feeling. Now, again, when there are restraining orders and some of those things, there are bigger issues that may need to be addressed. I know sometimes we talk a lot about if you've got addiction with a parent, rather than focusing on that parent's addiction, you focus more on safety with regards to drugs or alcohol, right? And you don't address your mom is an alcoholic or your dad's an alcoholic and you need to be careful to that. It is more about recognizing signs of an adult maybe not being safe. What does safety look like? What should a child do if they feel unsafe? Again, and it's not denying that a parent has a problem. If the child knows that the parent has a problem, you don't want to gaslight them and, oh no. But it is acknowledging whatever the situation is, but then taking that broader lens and looking bigger. How would you help your child address a situation like this in other circumstances? If other family members, or let's say a parent of a friend was exhibiting unsafe behaviors, how would you teach them to identify those behaviors, and how would you teach them how to find safety?
Super good.
All right.
Just to also speak on the restraining order piece too, just know that if there's a difference between whenever we say there is a domestic violence or verbal abuse and those kinds of things, that is considered domestic violence. And then there's the actual domestic violence restraining order. So you do want to make sure that if there is actually a restraining order in place, that you're not violating your own restraining order and how you're communicating with the other parent. And if there are things, often there will be carve outs in a restraining order to allow you for peaceful exchanges of the children and drop offs and pickups at school and those kinds of things. So looking at the ways that you can minimize the impact on the children of the two of you being in contact with each other rather than exposing the children to the two of you being in relation to each other. So looking at some alternative ways to do that. And then also looking into therapeutic resources for children. Sometimes it's helpful to have a therapist that the kids can work with that's not going to be involved in any court process, but that's just a person that they can talk to. And therapists are mandatory reporters. So if there is something that's going on, then when they're with the other parent, then the therapist is a good, solid, safe place for landing.
Yeah. The next question is for both Alyssa and for Kelly, and one on the legal side, one on the personal side. How to talk to kids that have been told constantly that one parent is responsible for the divorce, and they are now fully choosing the other parent, refusing parenting time or any kind of contact. This person has two boys, 11 and 14 years old.
That's a really tough situation, and I'm so sorry. Again, I think this would be something that, in order for me to give really good guidance, I would need to know more of the details of it. I think at the end of the day, what I want you to know is that sometimes what happens when kids are in that situation, that high conflict situation, or they have one parent who's creating the conflict, what happens is children tend to not align, but they feel like, so children tend to go towards security, right? And so if they've got one parent that maybe is creating chaos, they might feel they need to align with that parent to create security for them, because often they'll know the other parent that they actually feel security with isn't going to stop loving them, right? Isn't going to turn away from them. I know this sounds probably very counterintuitive, particularly to a parent who's going through it. But a child, it's just like a child will tend to misbehave in the parent's house that they feel more security in. They won't do it in the parent's house where they don't feel secured because they're afraid, right? They feel more secure with that parent. So this may be a situation in which the children have seen their father badmouth the other parent, or a mother badmouth the other parent. And that creates a lot of insecurity for them. What if I don't do what they want? What are they going to say or do to me? And so I'm just going to do what they want, because I know if I do that, I'm going to be okay here. And I know my other parent will always love me. It's a difficult one. And again, I encourage you to reach out and we can talk about your situation in greater detail.
Good tough.
And Alyssa, what about the legal side? Is
Yeah,
there something
that's a really tough one. So I would be curious to know, is there a co-parenting plan in place? Has there been a petition for dissolution filed? Because once there's a petition for dissolution filed, there are what are called standard family law restraining orders that go into place. Not the same as a domestic violence restraining order, but a restraining order that says you can't transfer beneficiaries, you can't dissipate assets, you can't do anything outside of the ordinary course of business with your finances, you can't take a child. Do you know what I mean? That restricting access to children thing is prohibited once that petition is filed. So I would be curious to know if that's happened. If it hasn't, getting some really solid legal advice would probably be important first step, right? Because to tell you the way the law looks at it and the way the research looks at it and what we know about children and their well-being, no contact with a parent is unhealthy and harmful to them. Having no contact with a parent is unhealthy and harmful for them. Now, sometimes there's the situation where, hey, they're just a hot mess. Yeah, they might be. And the court would order supervised visits or some kind of supervisor, like something in place to be with the parent while they're with the child. Very rarely is it no contact.
Unless the safety.
Again,
Yeah.
and we're not talking. This is
Right.
This
Exactly.
is the healthy people. This isn't like I'm sorry, and I don't need to tell you about how the awful stories are, right? But we're talking about hey, we're just upset. There's been a thing and our family's restructuring, right? As opposed, there's been a serious rupture and violence and abuse and addiction and substance use disorders and layers upon layers and that kind of stuff.
I just want to point out, and Elisa, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think this is a perfect example of you can work with an attorney in a consulting capacity, and Elisa can do that. So she's not going to represent you in court and litigation, but some of you may just need to consult with an attorney in some of these important stages, or even in the beginning, because I think there's so many myths out there about divorce and fears, and sometimes just consulting with an attorney who understands the law can help level set and
Absolutely.
bring things a little more and to give more clarity to the realities of things. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, you can work with a consulting attorney. There's what we call full service representation, where they're the sword and the shield. Everything goes through the lawyer, or consulting attorney that's just there behind the scenes that can answer your questions, be on the bat phone if you have questions. You can be in mediation, and the attorney can be guiding you to help you make proposals. But this is that situation where you need to gather that information. And even in a situation where a parent is a really hot mess, you can remedy some of those ruptures with time. And it does take a lot of effort. It takes a lot of resources and a lot of really specialized resources to bring that back together. But if you don't have a co-parenting plan in place, the court would make one. And if you're not seeing your children, the court would make a co-parenting plan and a child sharing schedule for the children that don't want to have contact. And then the court will deal with that, what we call resist and refuse dynamic, in terms of how you deal with that. So the sooner that you get on that, the better, because it can take time. And sometimes they say that for every negative interaction that a parent has, it takes 3 to 4 positive interactions to remedy that. And sometimes we see that when there's been a rupture in the parent-child relationship, having more time and more opportunity to do fun things can often help repair the rupture that has occurred. So those are really nuanced things that you definitely want to get advice and support and resources, and to just give you reassurance, they exist.
Okay. The next question I see here is for Alyssa, and it is, I no longer have money to pay my lawyer, but my spouse has a lawyer. Will I be a sitting duck when it comes to equitable distribution?
Okay. So 2 things there. You don't have money to pay for your lawyer, and they have a lawyer, so you had to get rid of yours. This happens a lot. We see this a lot. So in terms of that, it may be that you want to get some legal advice on a consultation basis. It may be that you want to meet with a finance person to get some proposals together on the finances to help you with that part that you need. It may be that you need to, first off, know that the default rule in California with regard to property division is basically a 50-50, right? If you have a basket of fruit, everything in the basket gets divided up. So that is a thing. If it turns out that your spouse has money and they can afford their attorney, it may be something to consider whether or not you need to pursue asking the court for an attorney fee order for you, right? The court would want to know what your income and expenses look like. There's some things that you would need to do. The family law facilitator's office in every court in California, every county has one. They can help you and give you some advice about how to file the request for order for attorney's fees and what you need to give the court so that they can make an order for you to pay for an attorney, especially if there are community resources and community funds available to support you in that way. But if it's a finance thing that you're worried about because you feel like you don't understand the finances and those kinds of things, and you do have limited resources, I would say working with a finance person to kind of really get your post-divorce budget and get the lay of the land with all of the finances would be a helpful thing for you so that you have that. And again, you can always invite them to mediation, right? Just because they have a lawyer and you don't. We have lots of cases where one person has a lawyer, the other doesn't. They come into mediation and you get it done because you can talk about all the things that you need to talk about. And the cost is often you're sharing it and you're both getting the information from one reliable source as opposed to attorneys that are going to sometimes posture, not all do. Finding a good attorney makes a difference, but having reliable and trustworthy information is going to be key.
Another legal question that was asked is, if there's a marital trust within the last will and testament, does it get voided in a divorce so new estate plans can be created?
Okay. This is the biggie, right? This is the messy stuff, right? So my favorite, I'm going to say the words, it depends. So this is one of those really kind of complex questions. So often I think of the trust as like a container, right? So in that container are all the things. And while you're alive, it is going to be what we call revocable, meaning you can go in and change the contents around. And the trustees are you and your spouse. So there is what's happening in family court, and then there's what's happening with this container that's holding all of the things. So there are things like, hey, this box, when I die, I want all of these things to go to my husband. Okay. Until your marital status is terminated and you're no longer a spouse, what is that? So it only goes to this person in name and then title, spouse. Then is it a spouse or is it to the person? So it gets complicated. There are some carve outs in California with the standard family law restraining orders. Remember, I said that you can't transfer and change beneficiaries, cancel insurance, and those kinds of things. There are some special carve outs in there for estate planning. So get legal advice about it. It depends. Often the trust has to be dissolved, right? Because you're no longer married to each other. So these instructions that are often to my wife or my husband, they don't exist. Sometimes we used to have what are called AB trusts. So when I died, all of anything I have left over gets poured over into mine, and whatever you had gets poured over into yours, and then it goes that way. But it really just depends on how old the trust is, how long your marriage was, and what's actually in it. But the family court is going to have jurisdiction over all of the stuff in that box if it was acquired during the marriage. That's a really broccoli, it depends answer. So,
Okay. Well,
good one.
okay. Kelly, I think this question is for you. Might run over into Elisa too, but in the case of an extended separation where the parents have functioned in a co-parenting role for many years and the now adult children graduated in late college are aware the divorce is inevitable, what are the other long-term concerns? We have continued to attend their events together, but certain personal events like birthdays and Mother's Day have been separate.
So what are the other things to consider? I think the first thing is, my question would be, what have the conversations been with your children around what's going on with the marriage and with the family? I think the other consideration is when you have that conversation is getting a sense for what's worked for your kids as you've been co-parenting, what maybe hasn't worked. What are some of their concerns about things moving forward? So it really is talking to them. I think the same things, again, regardless of how old your kids are, they never want to be put in the middle. You don't want them to be remembering their wedding and thinking about, oh, well, the first thought is, where do I put mom and dad? Because I can't sit them next to each other. Or one of them is bringing a +1. Well, how's that going to turn out? Or they're going to have a child and they're worried about, if I call dad first, mom's going to be mad, or vice versa. So it really is you two coming together and letting your kids in no uncertain terms know that you both love them, that you're not in a tit for tat situation, that they need to, as adults, operate what is most authentic in the most authentic way to them, and that you're not going to make them choose between the two of you or make their choices a thing. Again, there may be some more specifics, and if you want to reach out, I'm happy to discuss those.
All right.
Hey, Lisa,
Next.
can I just add a quick comment to the question prior to that on the trust. I'll just tell you, Lisa and I most often do see post-divorce, those trusts being dissolved and new ones being created,
Yeah.
right? And that will be part of something that Lisa and I will work with you. It can be the smallest thing, right? It can be, as Elisa said, you can't change beneficiaries while you're going through the divorce. So we can tell you, 9 times out of 10, we're sitting with one of you folks post-divorce, and your beneficiaries still are your ex-spouse even after the divorce is final, right? So that's going to be part of that financial thing they want to make sure we work through, is that your beneficiaries are up to date. You probably will need to create a new trust for yourself and your kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you
All right.
will have to actively dissolve the marital trust. So when you've dissolved the marital trust and you don't have something, that's a thing. I've had couples where they've worked with the attorney that drafted their marital trust to set up separate trusts, and that attorney agreed to do that. They waived any potential conflict that attorney might have. So then they had those separate trusts, and then they took their separate thing once it's all done and took it to their other person and did whatever they were going to do with it so that it could be on their terms, their people, they're not part of their amounts of stuff.
I would make sure you work with somebody like Jacob and Lisa to make sure whatever trust you're setting up is funded properly.
100%.
Correct. 100%.
And make sure that you've got whatever's in that marital trust
Yeah.
titled differently. People don't even realize until later that, yeah, we have this account, we have that. Often, like even with houses, we've had situations where parties will close down a bank account that was in the name of the trust. The house is in the name of the trust. And when a sale closes, the proceeds can only go to wherever the asset is titled. And so if you don't have an account anymore that's in the name of the trust to receive that. So sometimes we've seen situations where you had to transfer the asset, the house, out of the trust into the name of the party so that the proceeds could be divided and could go to the respective parties. So it can
All
get
right. One more question for Kelly. I love this one though. My daughter is 12 and I'm looking for age-specific dialogue to ease her into this change. The change of our dynamic was overnight and we have only explained to her that our friendship has changed, similar to that of her kindergarten best friend to that of today's friendship with the same classmate. Though as we proceed, things are getting stickier.
So I think it was a good start. What I would say is that I think it's important to name what's happening. Children have this magical thinking that maybe things aren't going to happen. My parents really aren't getting divorced. They're just friends who are in a rough patch. Right. So I think it's important to name what it is. Your father or your mother and I have decided that we are going to get a divorce and be living separately. And I think at 12, your daughter can hear that. Again, be thinking more about what's important to her, right? Does she do certain activities? Is staying in her school, is that going to have to change? Being around her friends, all of those things. This is, again, about reassuring your children that their life isn't going to blow up, right? That you are still that secure, steady foundation for them. And yes, things may need to change, but things may need to change even if you stayed married, right? Someone could lose a job, right? You might have to move, whatever it may be. So again, take it out of the lens of divorce and talk about what's really going on. There's change. Change is hard. You can acknowledge change is hard.
And Kelly, one of the common themes in the questions, it's a lot of different age groups. So from 4 years old to 12 years old to 13, 14 to college. What are the differences in these kids that they can, like, when are the ages they can start to handle some more communication?
It's a good question, but it not only depends on the developmental stage and age, it depends on the individual child, right? Certain kids can handle things at certain ages and others cannot. And so, again, I think this is where it's important to work with somebody who can talk to you about the specific needs of your children, what's going on contextually. A lot of parents want to first send their kids to therapy, and I think therapy is great, but a lot of times the issues that are creating problems for kids are the parental conflict, and kids can't solve that. You all need to solve that. And so there's just a lot of issues there. I've touched on it a little bit. Younger kids tend to be concerned about things. Who's going to put me to bed at night, right? Where's my bed going to be? Where are my toys going to be? And each age group has a different set of concerns and needs. We don't tend to deal with college age kids because they're not required to by the law. But what happens? Do I still get to go to college? Is it still going to be paid for? Are you still going to handle the things? They're going through a huge transition in their own lives. And so you don't want to add to their overwhelm. And I'm seeing that we're at time.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here. What a wonderful conversation that we got to have today. Thank you to my Vesta Hub members. I'm just so proud to be part of a group with these professionals and being of service to you all in this way. We all offer complimentary consultations to meet with you. If you decide you want to have further discussions about these things, reach out to any one of us. Our concierge will be connecting with you after we're done today. And then you're invited back next month. We're going to be here next month. It'll be a different topic. Again, we always make sure that we try to have time at the end to answer your questions, and we would love to have you back. So thank you all so much for being here. Have a good rest of the week, and we hope to see you again at one of our future talks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.